Hello everyone. I want to welcome you to our webinar, Nurturing Company Culture Through Organizational Change. My name is Al Zenk. I'm the Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Care.com. I have two colleagues here working with me today. I've worked in human resources for 38 years, worked in growing companies going through lots of change and acquisitions. So it's always been the dynamic of going in and helping to manage through difficult change. My bio's on the screen, and again, worked in mostly startups, technology businesses, but hopefully we can share some experiences both from Care and also from some of the other companies that we've worked at in our backgrounds. I'm going to introduce you to Joanne Durr.
Hi everybody, I'm Joanne Durr. I am the Vice President of Human Resources here at Care.com, and I'm responsible for strategic programs for employee development and training, and currently working on a rebranding, employer branding. And I do a lot of work with Norm in that regard. My bio is also on the screen, so I won't bore you with the details. You can take a look, and I'll introduce you to my colleague Norm.
Thank you, Joanne. My name is Norm Sozio. I am the President and Founder of Corsica Partners. We are a small boutique firm in the Boston area, and we focus on a variety of talent solutions for growth stage companies. Most recently, for the last 18 months, we've been working with Care.com as they've continued their growth spurt, and we've been helping them with their talent infrastructure, hiring lots of people, and their employment brand. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Norm. So before we get into the discussion, and we're going to do this in a very conversational way today, a couple of logistics things just to let you know. If you want to change the video to slides ratio on the screen, all you have to do is slide the divider bar, so just want people to know that. Also, if you have any questions, and we'll leave 15 minutes towards the end of this for questions, type your questions in the question box on the screen. And then one last thing we let you know is both the slides and follow-up from today will be, we'll send those out to you on Friday, tomorrow. So we'll do a follow-up on that. So again, there's just a few logistics items. So we thought this was an important topic. The three of us work pretty closely together here at Care, and again, in our backgrounds, we've done this a lot. So we wanted to talk about the importance of a strong culture. HR is often focused on culture, and we were thinking about bottom line and making a difference in the company, but also HR credibility as well, and we'll talk about HR's role in making all of this happen. It certainly is in our wheelhouse to do this. So again, we wanted to talk about how it benefits the bottom line, but also talk about it maybe in the scope of the employee life cycle as well. One of the things that we talked about when we first were planning this, we were talking about things like referral rates from companies as a sign of a healthy company, a company with a great culture. For your employees are referring their friends and colleagues, that's a sign of a very healthy company. When I started in HR, it was always turnover. If people were staying at the company, it meant you had a great culture. I think we've all learned over time, just because someone's staying at the company doesn't mean they're productive, it doesn't mean they're engaged. There are other measures. So referrals was one of them, and I was taking a look at some of the articles out there recently. Companies like Accenture and Ernst & Young are hiring 70% of their employees through referrals. So an interesting and maybe new measure as we start to talk about some of these topics today. What are some of the things that as HR professionals we can look at that will make a difference? I don't know if you guys have any comments on that one.
Yeah, no, thanks. I was thinking to extend on that. I was looking at the third bullet on that page about being aware of your own culture in order to articulate it, and I think that's one of the ways that we really can help in HR. Although the culture is often defined by the leaders, and we'll probably talk about that as we get going, we help to define it and to articulate it. So it's not just an organic, amorphous, you kind of know it when you feel it kind of a thing. And I think that who you are and who you say you are and how you act need to be really consistent. In companies I've worked with in the past, that's been true, and others it hasn't been true. And that, to me, is one of the really interesting things about culture and the place where we come in HR, is to help to make sure that what we say and how we act are really consistent.
And I think that's a great benefit, particularly for growth stage companies, because you have an opportunity to promote your culture as a selling point for your company, particularly in today's environment where technology professionals in particular are very, very hard to come by. It's very competitive. Having a great culture and being able to speak to your culture is a pretty big attractive point for candidates.
I've walked into a few startups. I've worked at 12 of them over the past few years, and one of the things that's very common for the CEO to ask when you walk into a situation is, you're going to help me form the culture. And I think all of us in HR know there's a culture there already. You just don't know what it is. So I think the question a lot of leaders, particularly the CEO, is looking to answer is, what is our culture, and is it productive for the company? So that's often a job that it falls on HR, but you obviously have to work with the leadership to understand, first of all, what is it? And so I think a lot of us in HR work very hard at things like surveys and focus groups and even exit interviews to understand what's working and not working in a culture. So I think it's a challenge, and I think often even the leaders of the company aren't quite sure what it is they want, but they want you to come in and sort of help them understand it and create a framework around it. And it's a challenge for us to sort of articulate what that is and make sure we're on target.
So I think about it a little bit differently, perhaps. I think of the culture of a company as its personality. But unlike us, we're born with a personality. You get to sort of define what you want that to be. And so, thinking as an engineer, which is really my roots, I like to think about it with the end in mind, right? So the leadership of a company not only has a very large way of impacting that, they actually have a responsibility to do so, I think, because it kind of sets the tone for what the company is about, and it helps you identify the people that you'll attract into the company.
That's so interesting. That made me think that some leaders who are more introverted in style, or company founders who are more introverted in style, might have a harder time articulating what they're about because it's so obvious and natural to them. That's really interesting. Made me think about that with personality.
I mean, if you can do a very good job of defining your culture, articulating it, and creating a sense for what it is, it helps you in many, many ways, particularly in terms of attracting talent.
Yeah. And one of the slides up here was interesting. It says, it talks about failing in the first year, and that's something that a lot of us in HR are always looking at. What's the challenge? What are you looking at when someone leaves within their first year? What was the failing there? What didn't we understand? And so sometimes it falls on hiring. Sometimes it falls on not being able to articulate the culture as well. Another bullet up here I thought was an interesting one for discussion is, it mentions employees who are proud of their company's contributions to society are engaged at work. That's a big one. That's a big statement because a lot of companies maybe aren't focused on that. But in the past, I've noticed just company success in defining what that is. If we picked a company like Google, we'd all have an image of what that is and success. It can be sales. It can be the products that they provide. It can be the way they help humanity with what they do. But if people feel their business is successful, that's another element. And I think a new element that we're all seeing is looking at how companies can contribute to society and make a difference. But I also think those others make a big difference as well. And the leadership obviously drives how much the company's going to focus on those. Another one that's mentioned on here is engaged employees are less likely to leave the organization. And again, our old measure of this was turnover. Turnover only tells you a part of the story. Joanne does a program around engagement, and we talk about the people who are leaving are the ones who are in the back of the boat drilling holes in it. The people who are engaged are in front of the boat, they're rowing, they're participating in the business. So how do you know who those folks are, and how do you know your company is there? And again, I think it's a proactive approach. HR can help with the methodology for that, but it really needs the leaders to step in and understand and want to drive and increase engagement. And I think that's something you've worked very hard on.
Yeah, and I have to credit the employee engagement group for that the metaphor of rowing the boat, and that comes from the Gallup research. Again, so the folks in the front of the boat really have an active role in helping to drive that culture forward, and not necessarily just the leadership and not HR, but understanding what's the culture, what's our mission, what's our vision, what are our norms, all that sort of thing. And they're rowing and they're pulling and pulling. In the middle of the boat, you have folks and they're doing their jobs, but they're not necessarily engaged and they're not giving a lot of discretionary effort. So they could have the culture and they could get the culture, but they're not really contributing.
Yeah.
And the ones in the back are drilling the holes and trying to tank you.
Yeah.
They're particularly dangerous. They could be valuable. They could even be high performers in terms of contributors, but they're not helping the culture, and therefore they're really jeopardizing the enterprise.
And that large group that sits in the middle and can just go for the ride, they're there, They may not be fully engaged, and then they haven't made the decision to leave. That's also a difficult group to understand and also to try to manage more effectively.
So Al, you've seen a lot of companies grow and get large. You've been in a lot of startups. What leadership behaviors have you experienced that have been great drivers of great cultures,
Yeah.
and also on the flip side, those that haven't worked out as well?
Yeah, well, I think there's some obvious ones. I went into one of my past companies, and we were all sort of new to the management team, and I walked around and I asked employees, what kind of a grade would you give to the management team of this company? And I thought we had a pretty good team and we got along pretty well, and the answer was C, C minus. And when I asked more questions about it, it was because people didn't understand how well the management team got along. What was our relationship with one another? Do we challenge each other? Do we like each other? Do we think do we have a good sense of humor? Is this a group we like to work with? They just didn't get the opportunity to see that. They didn't know it. So they gave it a grade of a C because they didn't know, which is kind of a sad thing. So we weren't getting the grade on what we did. We were getting the grade in the fact they just didn't know about it. So to answer your specific question, Norm, one of the things we did, and I've done, and certainly driven at this company, we do this quite a bit, our company meetings where employees have the opportunity to see the leaders work together, and we do that a lot anyway, but visibly work together, share ideas, promote innovation in the company, and don't do it as individual leaders, but work together in teams or in groups to do that. I think another way of doing that is just openness. When a CEO could get up in front of the employees in the company and talk about how the business is doing, if we lost a piece of business, to be able to be open about that, as well as to talk about those successes. So I think it's really important for people to be able to see how the leadership thought process works, and I think the more people are in the loop on that and involved, the more engaged they are. It's one of the things that comes up a lot about engagement.
Yeah, I'll add something to that. I've seen a number of companies where there exist multiple cultures, and what I mean by that is there's an employee culture, and then there's a management team culture, and oftentimes the management teams aren't even aware that that sort of a distinction exists amongst the employees about what the culture is for everyone else versus what the culture is of the management team. And I think that one of the things that I've witnessed here at Care.com is the absence of that. There seems to be, and to your point, fairly transparent, consistent behaviors across the board, and we actually leverage that quite a bit in our ability to attract talent here.
So I think it's just people, to a large extent, just understanding the leadership team and know where they're coming from and get a chance to have a relationship. Managers and senior leaders with the doors shut, typically, people aren't going to know. So the C grade's going to be kind of the default. I'd rather get a grade on what I do than because people don't know how I operate with the rest of the team.
It's interesting. I think what you're talking about comes back to alignment for me, so that if the leaders are not walking the talk, they talk about transparency, but they're behind closed doors. So they talk about, humility, but they're bragging about themselves, or they talk about entrepreneurship and they're not, and they're risk averse. Then there's a real inconsistency between what their culture is as a management team and what the rest of the company is. So I think transparency and alignment is really key.
Sure, and I think we're kind of, delving into what makes a great culture, right? Trust, transparency, openness, the feeling that you can, be open about your thoughts and ideas, and even make yourself vulnerable without penalty, I think is huge.
On this slide, we mentioned consistency. There's another word I put in there, because consistency sometimes people take to mean, we need to make sure we keep doing things the same way so people know what they are and it's reliable and it's dependable. But I think another word that's really important is continuity. So if, for example, because your company's growing and you can't have company meetings the way you used to, I think it's really important on the continuity side is to show people what it is you're doing to evolve the programs. We talk about evolution here a lot. So in HR, when you're making a change to a current process or policy or any element of HR programs, and you're replacing it with something new or you're changing it because you need to, it's important for people to understand it. The worst thing that can happen is at an exit interview, an employee comes in and says, well, you used to do this and then it just went away. That's a very typical response of, I think, leadership and HR not managing the process well. I've had a few of those happen. At one company, we had a stock program, tried to manage it, We rolled it out to all the employees, so they actually got stock options. But it was such a kludgy program to run, so we stopped it and we actually raised people's pay. And what we heard about it later was that the pay piece was almost totally missed, and it was the fact that this program just sort of went away without any discussion. So I think that's continuity and consistency kind of go together.
Right, so change is going to happen. Things will evolve. You know, the example you gave is one of many. Whose responsibility is it, Al, to first of all realize that this is happening and that it has an impact on the culture, but then to do something about it so that people are informed and realize that change will happen and is happening and it's normal, and so that they can, you know, be well equipped to deal with it.
Yeah, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a joint responsibility of leadership in HR, right? It's leadership. It's either HR. We're going to pick it up first and call it and say this is happening. This change is happening. We need to name it. We need to give voice to it. Or the leadership says this is a change I want to make. Can you help me, HR, articulate it? And we do it together. Because if it just happens organically, naturally, and we don't talk about it, people don't necessarily know that it was planned. And that was done in the best interest either for them or for the business.
Yeah.
Because it could be positive change, they might experience as positive or as negative, but it was done in the best interest of them and of the company.
Yeah. I think it's a burden. I know I've done it, walked in when the CEO says, you know, help me with the culture, and taken it on as though it was my job alone. And you know, want to go in and make big changes in the company, and you realize you are alone if you're not working with the rest of the leadership team, and they're not buying into the direction and the programs that support it. Plus, you get great ideas from people. If you have a sense of what the direction is, the changes you want to make in a culture, then getting the leaders involved, having them be a part of the energy and the momentum behind it is critical. And if you're standing there alone in HR, it's just an HR program.
Right.
And I
So
think
culture
that's a
here at Care.com is big. I mean, you know, coming into it as a supplier, you know, 18 months ago, it was pretty clear that it's a big part of what has brought people here and what has contributed to the success of the company. One of the things that I see in my business is that a lot of the more progressive companies get very deliberate about culture and about identifying what it is, about setting it to be what it is, and ensuring that through periods of growth there are mechanisms in place to promote and preserve the culture, right? And some of them can be as simple as what we do here with our THEIR acronym to articulate our core values and making sure that people are aware of that and that it's posted and all of that. But some get a lot more, committed to it by having institutions within the company whose job it is to inform all new employees and to indoctrinate them into what the company's about, what its vision is, what their goals are, what their culture is, so that as a company grows, that isn't lost. Imagine being a 400-person company who's going to hire 200 people in a year or 300 people in a year. Those companies do exist. If you don't take deliberate steps to ensure that your core values and your mission and your way of operating are properly communicated to new employees, then you may end up with results that you weren't looking for.
I was thinking about that a lot this morning, and then again when we were talking before the webinar, that I don't think there's any wrong company culture or wrong set of values. I think that there are places where I've worked where I feel like I fit better than others. And I feel like I'm more myself and I'm more natural. But what we're looking at now in terms of how we think about the employee life cycle is the way that we do it, but the way I've done it in all other companies. You can just replace your values and your culture with that. You're recruiting and you're pulling in folks who are kind of going to make it. They both have the competencies and they have kind of the style and the attitudes and the beliefs and the behaviors that you're looking for. That gets pulled through in terms of onboarding, whether you do that on day one, first 5 days, first 10 days, or over time, as a lot of companies do. I've seen some spectacular onboarding programs, and we're playing with it and rejiggering it now at Care.com. But sometime in the very beginning of the program, you want to begin to talk about them, to talk about your values over and over and over again, to the point where they get a little bit annoyed by it, but that's okay, because that's the hallmark of your culture, and that's really competitive advantage, whatever your culture is. It comes up again in terms of development and training, and you're talking about it, and you're training for that, and you're mentoring for that. It comes up in all the ways you organize your HR systems, and in your operations, and in your benefits, of course. And then upon exit, you're talking about that and asking what could we do differently. So whatever it is, it needs to be consistent throughout. The last thing I want to say is that I'm thinking that in addition to a culture not being wrong, a culture can really be a competitive advantage and a flexible, open one that moves you and supports the strategy, or it can be one that constrains you and holds you back. And some of the companies that we've worked with in the Northeast, on the 495 belt, on the 128 belt, who are there no more, right? The culture was just so heavy and so thick and took them down.
Yep.
It took them down, and I don't need to name names. I'm sure a lot of people on the phone know, or if you're on the West Coast, you've got those companies also. The culture really weighed them down, as opposed to it being nimble enough, using those core values to propel it
Yep.
and to support the new strategy. But here's the employee life cycle, kind of how we operationalize it.
When we were talking about a strong culture, strong doesn't mean overbearing or overwhelming. There's companies where they go so far out
Yeah.
and the employees start to wonder, what am I here for? I do want to go be able to feed my family. I am trying to make a living. So there's this balance between culture and then productivity. There was a book I just got in the mail, and it talked about people having mastery and being able to grow in their profession. It's kind of a self-actualization in their careers, and companies that don't provide that, they want to move on from those companies. So I did make another point about this chart is there was an article recently in LinkedIn, and the CEO came on and he said, if you see, when you walk into the lobby of a company, the company values up on the wall, run the other way. And I think I got his point was that, you know, their values are, that's the last you'll see or hear about their values. And I think what's great about this chart, and you could expand on it, is from the time people come into a company, and we talk about it here a lot, but when someone's coming in as a candidate and they go through onboarding as an employee, and then they go through their performance management, our values as a company, and I think companies that do this well, continue to be a part of those. When you're getting your review, you're being reviewed on how you live to and match up to the values. When you come into the onboarding session, we talk a lot, and our CEO comes into those meetings and talks a lot about where they came up with the values of the company. And when we do our training and our management development, it's a big element of what we do. So it's not something we talk about once when you join and then we stop. We make sure it weaves through all of these, as Joanne mentioned, so we think that's pretty important.
I wanted to also make a comment about career development here. And it had come up, I think, there's a question that was submitted ahead of time about millennials. I think because we've got the 4 generations in the workforce, I think we need to pay particular attention to development, but also I'm a big believer in Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn is talking about this a lot, about the tours of duty, that people need to play to their strengths, right? But also be clear about what they want out of their employment experience. What do you want out of your next 2 years here, 3 years here, 5 years if you're going to stay? And what do I need from you as my manager in order to support my growth and development? So I think we've shifted from here's your career path and here's your career ladder and it's handed to you and here's how you reach the next step, to what do I need to do and how do I take more responsibility to be successful within this culture, right, to act in accordance with this culture and get results, which is also another big hallmark, I think, of the new company, is getting results. You mentioned that earlier. And how do I drive that for myself with the support of the company?
Yes.
This slide about mergers and acquisitions is up here, and it's something we've had some experience with both here and at other companies. But I like the point on here that most integrations fail due to the cultural disparities that happen. And I've seen examples of this. Obviously companies have their own language and approaches, but we've worked hard, and in some situations we've gone in and made sure they know our policies and how we do performance reviews. And then you might forget one thing. So you get to the end of the review cycle and everybody's using your formats and your approach to doing reviews, and then you realize they rate everybody very highly in their company because they're very successful. So suddenly you've covered everything you needed to do, and everybody at this new company you've acquired is top-rated employee. There's no variation in the ratings, and it's one of those things where you don't usually sit down and say, look, we tend to distribute ratings here, or most of our employees tend to meet or exceed. We're not all far exceeding, but it's you usually find one of these things will pop up and you realize, we never really talked about that with them. So it is about language, it's about a philosophy, and a lot of times you can check the box and go through many of them, but these things will tend to sort of rear up as you get through the process of acquiring a company, and they can go pretty well, but it typically is one of these, and I think any of you on the phone who have been through one of these, it's one of those cultural issues. It won't be around the mission, it won't be around the business. There may be things in terms of how people account for numbers and look at things like that, but generally speaking, it's going to be one of these cultural issues.
Have you ever seen it done really, really well? And what was the difference?
Well, I think the thing that makes the difference, I can't tell you I've seen it done really well, because I'd write that book right now and, it'd be worth millions. But I think for people who've been through it and feel like it went as well as it could, it was tied to the upfront piece, which is very difficult. Spending a lot of time up front when you're anxious to get to the kind of closure and close on the merger or the acquisition, and you're still asking questions and spending time. It's hard to be patient with that process and really dig into it. But I think everyone who does that will tell you that's the chance to get to really understand and know people. But there'll be pressure, maybe from investors, it may be from some of the leaders. In a fast-moving market like this, you don't want to take too long to do these kind of business things. But again, as much time as you can spend up front, it's a little like interviewing employees. It's the same principle.
Mm-hmm.
If you do a lot of good work in the interview process and the upfront process, your success later will be better. But managers are waiting for their resources to get on board, and they're looking for you to get these people. Everybody likes the person, they fall in love, and they move quickly. That happens with mergers and acquisitions too.
And I think some of the fallout is inevitable. And at the end of the day, there's usually a business driver behind it.
Yeah.
And someone is being acquired and someone is acquiring. So it's some of it's.
So I agree. I've been on a lot of acquisition teams, and particularly in the 90s and going into the when we all stopped in 1999, 2000, we were picking up in some of those acquisitions red flags. And there were cultural red flags, but that never stopped an acquisition, right? Because the strategy was there, the product was there, the technology was there, the people was there. So what I learned is you just have to go ahead anyway, right? You raise your hand, you say red flag, but then because we want to buy that company and 1 and 1 is going to equal 3, we're going to end up more than, hopefully, because we've bought them. I think a quicker integration is more valuable to say, okay, we've just bought you. We used to tease in one company I worked with, we are the Borg, and resistance is futile. And they, I don't really like it. But, new signage, new business cards, new phones, new this. And, this is a new company. This is what you signed up to do. And this is what's going to happen. You're going to give up a little bit of this and that, but this is what you gain in return. So here's the value proposition. So people can be really clear that they can opt in or opt out at the very beginning. You try to stabilize the people, of course, that you want to at the very beginning, but I'm in favor of quicker integration rather than the slow, we're going to do it really slowly over time and coddling approach. I don't think it works as well in business. I just don't.
I think the second bullet gets at some of this too. We talk about creating a culture. When you acquire a business, and particularly when they're global, and there are a lot of differences between we have a group in Germany. There's rules and laws from an HR perspective about what their offer letters look like and what kind of questions they can ask in an interview. So how does a company put an umbrella of culture? If your goal is to say, at our company CARE, we have a culture, and be able to say that with integrity, what are those things you can do in these various locations, even though there's actually cultural differences in the country that may be contradictory. So we've looked for the things that we can do in each location. So when you walk into our Berlin office, or you walk into our office in Austin or out in Mountain View, does it look and feel in some ways the same way? Do people engage you the same way? We talk about these values. We talked about it in the life cycle. We also incorporate those when we're acquiring a business. We talk a lot about our values. So hopefully one of the reasons they want to be a part of the company is these values. Performance reviews, even though, again, there are differences country to country, we take a look at make sure our values are put into those reviews. We incorporate those, whether interviewing in Germany, and we talk about them, or we're in Mountain View, California, which can be as different as Germany is from Massachusetts. So there's a lot of differences. I think everybody knows that. So I think this issue of looking at what are the things that you can put in place, and I do feel like we've accomplished here, and I've done it at other companies, where there is a sense when you go into the company, I feel like I'm at that company, wherever I am in the world. And HR can play a key role in sort of the look and feel of that, and help guide and give consulting advice to the leadership on those points. But that's a big one, and that comes up a lot.
Right.
I think that's going to get into employer branding, which comes
Yeah.
up in a couple of slides,
Right,
which I'll talk about.
but-
Go ahead.
I was going to say on this point of geography and that sort of thing. So there will be cultural differences based on geography, and also based on the fact that maybe the geographical distance as a result of an acquisition or something like that. But I think the key thing is to take what you can to display consistency and fairness to all, and start to treat everyone as though they were the same company, tied into the speed of the integration. I think goes a long way to unifying the culture.
Agreed. Excellent.
So again, this is something we've spent a lot of time developing when we started at CARE and we started to build the HR function. One of the things was not only being able to attract candidates here, which Joanne will talk about, but also as we're going through this process, we all think about the amount of time we spend, managers interviewing, senior leaders interviewing, the disruption it has on the workforce while the job is open. So you want to make sure you're doing the best job you possibly can to bring the right people into the company. And so again, understanding your own company and culture and being able to articulate that to a candidate so they can kind of match up. One of the earlier statistics was being able to fit and know you're fitting the culture. That's what most people want to know.
And there's a tendency to think that you know it when you see it in a candidate. And that certainly is true, that you can tell, but it doesn't always provide the entire picture. And so one of the things that we've started to do is apply the same techniques that we use for competency assessment and skills assessment towards cultural fit. And one of the ways that you do that is by understanding what your culture is to the point where you can actually articulate it in terms of its characteristics. And then, much like you would for other skills, you can actually, in your interviewing process, assess for those characteristics in candidates. And so it actually puts a bit more of an objective approach towards identifying cultural fit than just feeling it. Because feeling it can depend on the individual, the day, what's going on. And so while it is a measure, it's not the complete picture.
Yeah.
So feeling it can be very subjective. So when we were first gearing up for this webinar and we looked at this fit, and whenever I hear fit, it makes me very nervous because I've worked in the diversity arena before, and you don't know when you've got biases and they're coming out. So to take the culture and to put it into words and to put it into behavioral questions is something that we worked on here. I learned my lesson from other companies where I think there really were some inequities and micro inequities because it's like they would say, I don't fit. But what was it that didn't fit? Is it because I'm a woman? It was because I'm white? Is it, I mean, what is it? No, it was because of this particular aspect. And when I asked you this question, you don't get that feedback normally. So this is the project that you and I had worked on, which is very clearly we had a whole behavioral guide, but if we took the core values and made behavioral questions out of them and then interjected them within each person's role on the interview team, and then when we were recapping the candidate to talk about the culture, how did I see the person in terms of humility or transparency or excellence or entrepreneurship might be different than how you saw them or you saw them, Al. That's a conversation based on what they said, not based on how they acted or how they looked, or their body language, or any of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
And so
that makes me
to
a
the
lot more
point of
comfortable.
training hiring managers to interview for cultural fit,
Yeah.
each one of those core values, what does that mean? And it's usually helpful to have a conversation in advance with the interview team
Right.
about what do we think of when we think about entrepreneurship? What does that mean? So that there's a consistent level of understanding before going into the evaluation process, the interview.
Another one I like to do, and this came up because people would ask me this question. I thought great interviewees would ask a question like, what are the gaps going on in this company that I should be aware of? And one person asked me a question, it was probably 5 years ago, and they said, if 90 days from now I was sitting in your office, what thing would I say you didn't mention to me or was sort of left out in the interview process? And I think that's a great question.
That's a good question.
So in HR, one of the things that we know the sort of the drawbacks, and sometimes you're a little reluctant to sort of speak to your company's faults. When I started here 3 years ago, it was a very small, entrepreneurial, fast-moving company, and the thing employees would say is, it's very hard to figure out how to do things here. I don't know what the process is. I don't see a procedure somewhere. I don't know who to go talk to. That is not a great company to bring someone into who just left IBM, where they have structure and infrastructure, at least if the person doesn't understand what that means, if they've never worked in a small company. So I like the last question on here, what's a cultural risk? A cultural risk might be, and it's one I think we're all aware of, somebody coming from a very large company and desiring to have that experience in a small company, but not necessarily knowing what it takes. And so for us to be able to articulate areas that we're worried about, challenges in a smaller company, and to talk specifically about some of the things people have said in our company. They're going to hear it anyway. You might as well
Right.
talk about it
That's
up
funny.
front and
Love
talk
that
about what
question.
some of those things are and what some of those challenges are. So I usually do that. I think that's a great image. What would this person be saying to me 90 days from now? I might as well tell them now
Right.
so that I have the integrity with them on this, but also we have the cultural fit. When they say, you know what, you told me about that, I'm on board, I'm excited. Most people join an entrepreneurial company because that's what they want.
This difference between culture and employer brand. So again, in preparing for the webinar, I was talking to one of the creators of the webinar series. I happen to think this is incredibly fascinating and fun. I think this is one of the most fun things that we can do in HR right now. And we've completely borrowed this out of the marketing world. We used to talk about it as employee value proposition, what's specific and unique. But the employer brand, what you see when you kind of come in, what you see the signage on the wall and the stuff and the awards and people smiling at you, whatever in the entryway. What you see and how people operate, what you say in the interview, how people really act really needs to be in alignment. So I think about that in terms of culture, and that comes from Ed Schein, when you think about that iceberg model. That's all you can really see. I mean, even in the first 90 days, you start to get into it. So this is what I saw, this is what you told me, and this is really how it feels. That should all be in alignment. After 90 days, you should say, yep, it fits, or, oh, I wasn't expecting that, and it doesn't feel good at all. So that alignment, that cultural alignment, is the same thing that we're going for in brand. So, and in terms of employer brand, is we're highlighting those things. We're highlighting this is what we say we are. This is how we operate. This is how we are. This is what's special and unique, and this is how we're going to tell that story. And then we usually tell it in a way that kind of sits under the corporate brand. So, whatever your corporate brand looks like, you want it to look kind of the same and have a similar kind of a feel, a little bit of same imagery, but much more employee-oriented. It's telling the story, if you work here, this is what it's going to feel like, this is what you're going to hear, this is what it's going to be like. And I just think this is a lot of fun to do this work.
I mean, one of the challenging things, and some of you may have this issue with either your company name or brand or business today, but when I got to CARE and started to recruit people and talk to people about it, I was finding that a lot of folks thought of us as a nanny company, that the people who worked in our business were nannies or caregivers, and they are a big part of what we do. But this is a business, an online business, and we were trying to get engineers to come and talk to us as well, and we have a technology team. And one of the things Joanne's been talking about is technology and mission. So we have the opportunity for an engineer to come in and work in some great technology, and at the same time have a mission that might be a draw. And it's one of those things where, again, you have to sort of assess in your company and in your brand, what are the gaps that are causing you not to be able to get those people on board. So we started to address that and get the word out there. But you have to sort of understand first what's causing the problem. All of us want to have pools of candidates available for jobs as soon as they open. This brand is a way to clarify, too, and get the word out about what your company's actually doing, what are the opportunities. And I think I've watched over the last 3 years for us that's changed quite a bit. So at least if you're competing in Boston as a competitive market, some of you may come from other cities where it's pretty robust right now. You want at least the candidates to have you on their radar screen. If they're going to interview at 3 or 4 places, you want to be one of those. How are you doing this brand piece that where they don't want to miss the opportunity to at least come in and talk to you about it? And that's a big challenge. And HR does do a lot of the guiding on this one. And Joanne worked very closely with our brand team here. So on that corporate piece, the partnership is always important on these.
And if you have a great culture, it's a great way to leverage that into
It
the
is,
value
yeah.
proposition to potential employees.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. Yep. Good. So we had some questions that came in ahead of time. Any
Yep.
questions that came in on the call, or you want to take a couple of these?
We can take a couple of these. Anybody want to dive in on one of these?
I kind of thought about all of them. I liked the last question where I really pondered for a bit. Somebody talking about possible sale of the company, and they were transparent and it didn't work. And I just want to applaud that company because, that's the transparency I think that I've really appreciated in companies I've worked with, whether they've been public or private, to the extent that the leaders can share what they're doing in a responsible and legal way. I think that's the right thing to do. So sharing what you can, telling people what the risks are, bringing them along with the
Yeah.
journey, and it didn't work out. There's lessons in that.
Yeah.
And I think being able to share what didn't work out and where I might have blown it as a leader or what didn't work and why, I think is really instructive. And then you're all in it together and you're all disappointed together, but you're consistent. So I just wanted to applaud the company. that
Yeah,
put
I
that
think
out there.
the very point that whoever sent the question in, that you were open with your employees. One of the reasons people leave companies is they're not in the loop. They feel like stuff happens. Very typically in a situation like this, and I've been through them, where the CEO comes out and introduces you to the CEO of the company we just bought. And you knew nothing about it, or you knew some travel was going on and you heard some scuttlebutt about it, but you find out about it after the fact. So, this particular deal didn't work out. But I think for people to understand what the company's strategy is, it's an opportunity to articulate that. It's an opportunity to, certainly talk about the fact that these aren't all going to work out. Our CEO did a similar thing, and ours did. But I think people appreciated. They knew with a senior management team, we were flying back and forth to Berlin. Our employees knew at the time we were a private company. They knew at the time what was going on. They were in the loop. And when we finally closed the deal, they knew who the people were. They knew all about the company. So where your company has the ability to do that, again, private companies can talk more about this than public ones. It's a great thing to do, and I would highlight that message to the employees. I would not have waited. I think it's a great question, but I think it says a lot about your company and how you value your employees that you did that.
And it's important to recognize that irrespective of the situation, there's always someone or some group that will feel differently about it than you'd like them to, and that's just part of it.
Yeah. Another one that's on the screen in front of us here is about cultural fit and applying to how it applies to millennials. Excuse me, I can't even say it. You can see how far away I am from being a millennial. And I think nobody likes to be labeled. Everybody likes to believe that we all bring some unique differences, but I think millennials bring some unique things to a company. I mean, they're probably, I always look at them as much smarter than I was when I got out of college. The amount of knowledge they have at their fingertips and the amount of knowledge that they bring is amazing. Their expectation about career growth and being able to talk about career growth. So from our culture, it's critical to understand what's the path here for me. Or at least to be able to articulate what the steps are to someone. So to be able to say we don't know. We work very hard at this company to look at how many internal promotions we do. There's a great article out online right now. Maybe we can put it in the follow-up material about typically what our company's doing in terms of internal promotions. I think that's a big number and an important number for millennials. How does your company compare to the market in terms of internal promotions? If everyone feels that the new people that are being brought in are coming in over you and taking away your opportunities, that's obviously one of those things that will reduce your engagement. And I think millennials are much more sensitive to that. We were the baby boomers, that the group I was in, we kind of fell in line and waited for the management to come down and tell you were getting a promotion. Millennials will come in and say, what do I need to do to get one? And so I think that's a generational difference, a stereotype, but still I think a generational difference.
Yeah, it's indicative of their expectation. They certainly have a much greater desire and need for transparency, but also it keeps us as employers, on the hook for creating a value proposition that endures for them. So they'll have to be learning, have opportunities, and have access to those opportunities.
Agreed. I was looking at the question about how do you determine the right balance between accountability and autonomy.
That's a good one.
And it took me a while to wrap my head around that. I don't know what the person meant. The way I interpreted it or the way I was thinking about it was to focus on results and treat people like adults. So I think that people always need to be accountable. You're here, you're working, you're getting paid to do a job. And they can't be completely off the ranch. They've got to understand what the strategy is and the vision and the mission and how to do things and their role and their responsibility and their relationships. And as long as they're working within those parameters, I think you should give people as much autonomy as you can. I think the days of micromanagement are over. And people don't want to work within that kind of a constraint. So if you treat people like adults and you give them a bigger runway and more leeway, I think they do a lot better. But they have to be accountable.
Yeah.
I think you always have to be accountable at work.
Right.
Another question I like on here is about identifying cultural attributes of possible acquisition targets before a deal closes. This is one of the areas I think as HR professionals we can be very, very helpful. Because while others are in there looking at the numbers and the inventories and whatever the key metrics are to decide if the business is a good one to acquire, given all of what we just said about the importance of culture as a driver of productivity, HR can be looking at a lot of these things, and I think we're uniquely set up to identify certain things. I was making some quick notes, but I think of as you look at how does a company do its performance reviews, that's usually something you can find out. What are the things they're asking about and measuring in performance? Things like turnover rate. Obviously, high turnover rate, it's not the only thing, but it certainly gives you a signal. The environment, even as you walk around, is it neat? Is it messy? Do people care about it? Is it creative looking? Is it buttoned up and there isn't a pencil out of place on someone's desk? Again, you can usually tell some of those things. Just how people look when they walk around
Right.
the building
Are they
tells you a
happy?
lot. Are they smiling? Are they walking around? When you walk into the lobby, if you go outside and walk back in, does somebody say hello to you? Or do they just pass you by like you're not even there? And I think those are things we're tuned into as HR professionals. The policy manual is always a dead giveaway. I've always liked to do a minimalist kind of approach to guidebooks and handbooks. HR people can write a 5,000-page policy manual if they want. I think we all can. So does the company have that, which means that's what they're leaning on to give answers to employees? Or are they asking employees to come and see and engage with HR if they have a question? And again, you can kind of get a sense of that just looking at if the policy manual, they put it on your desk and it falls with a thud, that's probably not a good sign if it doesn't fit your culture. If you're an HR function that wants your employees to be engaged and be able to talk to you, again, a minimalist approach might tell you a lot. Anyway, a lot of interesting ways to look at it.
So the one question we've been kind of dancing around ourselves that we've yet to address on the screen is how does a 100-year-old organization begin to change its culture?
And I think when I saw this, I was thinking, hey, you're 100 years old. I think you got the formula. Keep doing it. But I think we use a phrase in our company, evolution, not revolution. So I would say that maybe if there's a word lower than evolution or slower, that might be the one that applies better to a 100-year-old organization. Certainly change in an organization like that needs to be done in a really sensitive way. So acknowledging and identifying what's been done, and then when you're making the change, being careful to explain the rationale about why it's important to the business or the employees in that company. So whether it's company meetings or a benefit or even a pay structure, having people understand what it is you're doing and why. What's the data you're using? What is the outcome you're expecting? Those are all going to be critical. I mean, I congratulate anybody for being a 100-year-old business, but if you're doing it, I think even more importantly than a new entrepreneurial company that people are joining for the change, this is when you're going to have to be extremely careful, in my opinion, about that.
So I've seen this work and not work. So I worked for Digital Equipment Corporation, and very defined culture, very strong culture. It was an amazing place to work and had a fantastic strategy until the founder was very stuck on a point of strategy, and so you had the strategy here and you had the culture here. And I referred to it earlier. That was the Titanic and moving the deck chairs on Titanic. We had a culture that I think could have moved, was ready to move, had pockets that were ready to move, and the strategy was not mobile. So I think there's a lot of work at the top that needs to be done about really, are you willing to reinvent yourself? Are you willing to change some of your baseline assumptions about your strategy, which this company needed to do and didn't want to, was not able to get through that? And then what do we need to do differently as a company to respond to that strategy change? And those things just weren't in alignment. So it's not for the faint of heart. It doesn't always work, and a lot of companies have come out of business because they will not change their strategy. Yeah. So widen it, broaden it, change the strategy, and then use the culture to help to propel that strategy forward rather than start the culture all over. I don't believe that works. Yeah. But you can reset the strategy, and then the culture can follow up through that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's another question that came in, if you can read that.
I can't.
So what does it failing mean? What does failing mean with respect to new hires? Is that limited to leaving the organization, or are there other ways to measure when it's not working out?
Oh, that's a great question.
So failing, I mean, I can start it out. Failing is when somebody within 30, 60, or 90 days, or even within the first 6 months, is failing, then we've done something wrong. I think it's a bad hire. So something went wrong in the screening process, in the interviewing process, in the defining of the job process, in the culture fit, or in the onboarding process, or the training process. Something didn't happen in that first 30, 60, 90, or even 6 months. So it's clear that, to me, it's clear what a failure is, but then what are the options?
I think that is the right question. What are the
Yeah.
options? We do a proactive, and years ago they used to call it your probationary period. And so at the end of that, there was this big moment, did I make it or not? And a lot of companies, for legal reasons and others, have gotten away from that. But to be able to check in with somebody at sort of the 90 and 45-day window proactively and say, is it what you thought? Are we in line, what you were told in the interview, is that what's happening in the company? And that's a chance to check in proactively and see what's happening. Again, when you remember the early slides, we were talking about the fit is typically around culture. If somebody says they know how to do something technically, if they know a software programming language, or they know how to do public relations, they typically don't misrepresent that. Where the disconnect will be is, do they communicate like others in the company? Are they able to put ideas forward? Do they challenge if it's a culture where people challenge one another? They've been sort of sitting back and quiet. And so there's an opportunity to find out what it is that they're comfortable with or uncomfortable and give them some coaching. So again, another measure of a company is what you do, and I think Joanne's point, what are your options at that point? I'd like to believe that, and I think we do a pretty good job of giving people that option. Now, sometimes a person might say, thank you for the feedback, and I realized it isn't a fit, and now what do we do? And so that happens. When
Right.
somebody isn't, and you talk about, here's some of the things that are gaps for you and for us, can we put a plan together to address it? And people say, give it to me, I want to do it. And then there's others that say, I've kind of come to the conclusion, you're right, that it's probably not a right fit.
But,
You know,
but,
okay.
but when we don't hire well culturally, right, then the question is, why did that happen?
Yeah.
How could that have happened? And it goes back to what we said earlier about being a bit more objective in the assessment process to see if someone really is a cultural fit, right?
And to go back and find out what happened.
Right.
What didn't we ask? Where did we misread the signs? What had happened? Another place I've seen this is in entry-level positions. People come into a company, I'll just take that entry-level position because I want to get into the company.
Yeah.
And they're not a fit for that position, and so it's not working out, but you can really see that they're a fit for the company. So I've seen here, we've let it go 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, and they've gone into a different role because they're actually doing well in the job, they're just not happy, and they're mismatched. So that's another way to think about it. But if they're not doing well and they're mismatched and they're failing, we're not going to keep them because they're going to be not successful in any other part of the company as well.
Well, as you can see, we're putting up our last slide here, so we're at the end of the session. I hope that you felt on the other end this was sort of a conversation you were a part of. Obviously, opportunities to ask questions. We would love to hear from you, so feel free to do that. I'm sure you, as you were sitting there, that you had ideas you wish you could sort of just jump into the conversation. So I know, and we hope this kind of approach to this, it was helpful to you, at least raised some thoughts about what you might do differently. Again, we would like to hear from you. Feel free. The email information is up there. We'd be glad to share any other thoughts or ideas from our experiences. Any of yours would you love to hear about as well. So thank you again for taking the time and being part of it, and let us know what you think.